is Retrograde. The types of Retrograde, indications and contraindications, and we will also discuss some important radiographic images. So before coming to the discussion of urethrogram, we should have some basic understanding about urethra. Because if we don't have a basic understanding of urethra, we will not be able to understand urethrogram. So the female urethra is about 1.5 inch or 3.8 centimeter. And as it is a short urethra, so we usually encounter this problem in female urethra. And the male urethra is about 7 to 8 inch or 20 centimeter, and this urethra is classified into anterior and posterior urethra. The anterior urethra is further divided into the benign urethra and bulbar urethra, and the posterior urethra is divided into the membranous urethra and the prostatic urethra. Now, the nervous part of the urethra is basically the anterior meatus, and it is important that we should know that the membranous urethra is this is the area where we have the external sphincter. So on the urethrogram, this area sometimes shows a nerve, but it is a normal. Okay, so we should not confuse that. So this is the basic urethra diagram. Here we can see that this is the benign urethra, and here we have the bulbar urethra. And this is the membranous urethra, and we can see here the urogenital diaphragm, and this is the area where we have the external sphincter as it is the perineal transverse muscle. And then this part, this one which is transversing the prostate, this is basically the prostate urethra. And the prostate urethra is also receiving the ejaculatory duct, so we are not consulting with that in our this presentation. And this is the female urethra. We can see that the female urethra is anterior to the vaginal canal, and it is very close to the vagina. So this is important because sometimes we do encounter vaginal fistula that we will discuss later on. So now let us come to urethrogram. What is urethrogram? So it is the radiological study of the urethra after the introduction of a contrast media. So what we basically do, that we are basically introducing a contrast media into the urethra, and then we are several radiological images are taken. So this is what we call it as urethrogram, and this urethrogram is further classified into a retrograde urethrogram, also known as the ascending urethrogram, and anterograde urethrogram. Now retrograde urethrogram. So here basically what happens, that contrast media is injected when the urethral part is occluded to prevent reflux contrast. Here basically we do that a catheter is inserted into the navicular fossa, and the balloon of the catheter is inflated with 1 to 2 ml of distilled water or common saline, and then contrast is injected. So we will discuss this later on furthermore. So indication is, so why do we need to perform a urethrogram? So there are several indications. The important one are that if we have any structure, if there is any urethral tear, like for example, if a patient presents to us with any history of trauma, so we can have the retrograde urethrogram. Remember that in a patient who has suffered urethral trauma, and if he presents to us in the emergency department, so we are not going to perform the interrograde urethrogram, because for this purpose you need to negotiate the urethral catheter into the bladder, and we all know that whenever there is urethral tear, so we should not do that. The second thing is congenital abnormalities in periurethral or prostatic abscess, fistula, which is also known as the far passages, urethral diverticulum, urethral foreign body, and urethral mucosal tumor. So urethrogram can give us valuable information. Now what are the contraindications? So if there is acute urethritis, and if there is recent instrumentation or allergy to the contrast media, and this is the reason that whenever we are going to perform a urethrogram or any investigation in which there is involvement of the contrast media, so the patient should be asked a detailed history about any allergy, and set the responsibility of the urologist, who should also ask a detailed history from the patient before performing any investigation which involves the introduction of a contrast media. Now, what are the prerequisites of retrograde urethrogram? So we have to take informed consent. So the entire procedure should be explained to the patient, and there should be no allergic history to the contrast. and urinary bladder should be empty before performing this procedure. The technique is that the patient lies in a supine position on exit table, and under aseptic measures, catheter is placed in the distal urethra, and a warm contrast at about 20 to 30 ml is injected into the urethra after deflating the balloon application of 1 to 2 ml of saline. Now the question is that why do we need a warm contrast for this investigation? Is the reason is because if you inject, a contrast media which is cold, so this will basically induce contraction of the urethra, and if you get the radiological film, so you may be confused with the contracture. So that's the reason the contrast media should be warm before you perform the investigation. Now the penis should be placed laterally with the proximal thigh in my direct section. Now we are taking, we will take several images, which is basically the job of a radiologist. We will take a preliminary film, which we take just before the introduction of dye, and then we will take a 30-degree lateral anterior oblique film with right leg abducted and knee flex. Another film will take it in supine, which will be a PIU, and in 30-degree right anterior oblique with left leg abducted and knee flex. Now, whenever we perform REG, okay, but it actually followed by MCUG to treat the posterior urethra, but not in case of trauma. Now, this is a typical urethrogram. This is a normal urethrogram. Here you can see that this is the penile urethra, and this one, this is the bulbar urethra, and then we have this narrow part that you see. This is basically the membranous urethra, and then we have the prostatic urethra. Now, sometime, the bulbar urethra, just before it ends, there is a little bit dilatation, and it is called as the bulb of the urethra. So it should also not be confused with the dilatation. And then we have, this is another normal urethrogram, which is basically a retrograde urethrogram. And we can see here the tip of the catheter, which is introduced here. And after the injection of contrast media, the urethra is being clearly demarcated. And this is basically the penile urethra, then we have the membranous urethra, the bulbar urethra, and then we have the membranous urethra, and we have the prostatic urethra. Now this is another very useful urethrogram, which is showing us contraction of the urethra. If you look at the figure A, this is the figure A, you can see here that here is a structure, right? And this is basically the catheter. So this urethrogram shows that there is a structure just at the distal part of the penile urethra, and this is the reason you can see that the proximal urethra is dilated. Now, if you look at the second figure, which is figure B, you can see here, look at this area. We can see here that we have there is a structure at the bulbar urethra. Okay? And the penile urethra is normal. Now, this is another urethrogram which is showing urinary continuous fistula. As I already said at the very beginning, the urethrogram can give us some information about the urethra and about the urethral pathology. So here, just look at this diagram. This is the figure B, and you can see here this one. Okay, so this is basically a ureterocutaneous fistula, which is basically a communication between the skin and the urethra. It has several causes, but we are not going to discuss it. And now look at here. We can see several fistulas. So both these figures, both figure A and B, are showing ureterocutaneous fistula. Now, the urethrogram, a retrograde urethrogram, it can also give us reliable information about the diverticulum. Now, you can see here this diverticulum. Okay, so we can see that the contrast, the contrast has been injected, and here you can see a ballooning of the urethra, which is basically a diverticulum. So for this, we can conclude that urethrogram, that the retrograde urethrogram is very useful and it can use several information. Now, what are the complications of this retrograde urethrogram? So we can encounter several complications. The most important ones are acute UTI, we may have urethral trauma, there may be neutralization of contrast. This basically happens if you have a urethral structure, if you have a pulsable urethral structure, and if you are going to inject the contrast, and if the radiologist is applying a huge pressure, so sometimes whatever there will be neutralization of the contrast, it means that the contrast will be forced into circulation, into the blood vessels, and the weakened allergic reaction is already explained. Now, so the previous discussion was about the retrograde urethrogram, and now we are going to discuss the anterograde urethrogram. So it is basically the radiological study of the bladder and urethra, in which a contrast medium is injected into the bladder. And this can be injected by two ways. One is that you should pass the urethral catheter, but remember there should be no trauma if you are attempting to perform anterograde urethrogram. So there should be no trauma. If you want to inject the contrast medium through the urethra by passing a catheter, and it can also be done by a percutaneous netting of the bladder suprapubic. Or if you have a suprapubic catheter, so you can also perform this investigation. Now this investigation has got several names, and one of the name is Murad ancestral urethrogram or wide ancestral urethrogram. Now the indication of this investigation is if we want to study urethra, and if we want to study the bladder, abnormalities of the bladder, if you want to know anything about the bizarre reflex and stress incontinence, or anterograde urethrogram is an important investigation that should be performed in these cases. Now, contraindications, acute UTI, and if there is any hypersensitivity to the contrast media, so explain that we will not perform this investigation. If we have acute UTI, so first we should treat the UTI, and then we should send our patient for this investigation. Now, prerequisites that we should take informed consent from the patient, and the bladder should be empty before this investigation. Now, technique of the anterograde urethrogram. So the patient should lie in a supine position on an X-ray tube, on an X-ray table, under aseptic measures urine bladder is catheterized, and residual urine, if any, is read. After taking contrast media is injected under fluoroscopic guidance. Okay, under fluoroscopic guidance. This is important here. You see, when you are discussing the retrograde urethrogram, we didn't talk about the fluoroscopic observation. And here it is important because sometimes the catheter, it may go into the ureter, okay? And if this investigation is performed, so there may be a pulse without the ureteric reflex because you replace the catheter in the ureter. So that's the reason that first the ureter should be confirmed that yes, first the catheter should be confirmed that yes, it is within the bladder and not in the ureter, so that you may not be confused. And the patient is instructed to inform the radiologist when he wants to maturate. The catheter is removed once the contrast is dipped into the bladder. So once sufficient quantity of contrast is dipped in the bladder, so we can remove the catheter. Now again, we will take care of films. So one is the first film that we should take before the introduction of the contrast. The images are taken when the patient is menstruating and the right and left oblique projections and reflux is recorded. Finally, a full length view of the abdomen is taken to see any unnoticed reflux of the contrast that we may have occurred into the kidney and to record post-menstruation volume. So this can also give us an idea about the post-menstruation volume, that how much urine is remained in the bladder. Now this is a typical anterograde urethrogram, and here we can see that a contrast is being injected into the bladder, and now this is the prostatic urethra, and then we have the membranous urethra and the bulbar urethra. I told you that sometimes there is a mild dilatation in the bulbar urethra, and this is called the bulbar urethra. And this entire region is the bottom urethra, and then the final urethra. Okay, and this the prosthetic urethra, and there is this the posterior urethra, and then we have the anterior urethra, and you can see the contrast medium which is being injected into the bladder. Now this is another diagram of AG, which is showing reflux of the contrast media into the right ureter. Okay, so this retrograde aterograde can also give us information if there is any reflux or not. Then again, we can see the maxillary cystogram has been performed, and it shows that there is a desired ureteric reflux. We can see here that the contrast line is reflux from the bladder into the ureter. This is another very important radiological image. You see this image here. This is basically the vagina, okay, and this is basically the bladder. Now, the contrast here was injected into the bladder, and the contrast was also observed in the vaginal canal. So this basically shows that there is a vaginal fistula. This was the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.